In this week's Bizline, Vietnam's economic recovery to accelerate remarkably in the second half of 2022, according to Standard Chartered. And later on, Vietnam facilitates energy transition for net zero emission. Hello there, you're tuning into Bizline, our weekly economic journal on VTV International. I'm Hoàng Hằng, and as usual, we now take a look at news making headlines in Vietnam's economic scene this week.
According to Standard Chartered's latest Vietnam report, the country's economic recovery will be stronger in the second half of 2022, particularly as the country resumed its tourism activities after a two-year closure. The report said the Vietnamese economy will continue recovering in August as the upturn has shown signs of broadening. The bank maintained its 10.8% GDP growth forecast for Vietnam and predicted 3.9% in the third and fourth quarters of this year, respectively, taking the full-year growth to 6.7%. Retail sales are also predicted to grow strongly, at 60.2% in August, from 42.6% in the previous month. Electronic products remained the country's biggest currency earner. Price pressure may increase in the second half of 2022 and in 2023.
In the past 8 months, the socio-economic situation continued to have many bright spots across the board. The total retail sales of consumer goods and services reached a scale and growth rate higher than the same period before the COVID-19 pandemic. During the period, over 101,000 newly established enterprises have been registered, an increase of more than 31% over the same period, and more than 48,000 enterprises have resumed operations. The total registered capital added to the economy hit nearly $154 billion, an increase of more than 36% compared to the same period in 2021. The index of industrial production in the 8-month period also marked an impressive increase of 9.4% over the same period last year, of which the processing and manufacturing sector alone increased by more than 10%. Regarding the import and export situation in the first 8 months of the year, the total export and import turnover of goods was estimated at over $497 billion, an increase of more than 15% compared to the same period last year. A trade surplus of nearly $4 billion was recorded so far for 2022.
According to the latest information from the General Statistics Office, FDI in the first 8 months of this year was estimated at $12.8 billion, up 10.5% over the same period last year. This is the highest amount of FDI within 8 months in the past 5 years. Total new registered foreign capital reached nearly $16.8 billion. Out of 21 eligible industries, foreign investors have invested in 18. The manufacturing and processing industry continues to be the leading sector, with total investment capital accounting for nearly 64% of total registered investment capital.
The Consumer Price Index (CPI) for August edged up a mere 0.005% compared to July, raising the 8-month CPI to 2.58%, the General Statistics Office reported on Monday. This is the lowest CPI increase recorded in August over the past 5 years. Falling oil and petrol prices helped halt the CPI's upward trend in August, though prices of essential consumer goods and services, as well as educational services, stayed high. 9 out of the 11 major commodities and services groups saw prices rise compared to July. Overall, the 8-month CPI increase at 2.58% has helped reduce inflationary pressure for this year, and Vietnam is likely to contain its 2022 inflation to around 4%, as forecast by many international organizations recently.
Vietnam has welcomed more than 1.44 million international arrivals in the first 8 months of 2022, nearly 14 times higher than a year earlier, thanks to the country reopening to foreign tourists and the resumption of international air routes. However, the figure accounts for only 20% of this year's goal. The tourism sector has requested that visa exemption be extended to more countries, and that international visitors be permitted to stay for 30 days instead of 15. It has also called for the e-visa issuing process to be simplified.
Those are some highlights in Vietnam's economic scene. Up next, we will look into Vietnam's effort to facilitate energy transition for net zero emission in our crosstalk. Vietnam is among the world's most vulnerable countries to climate change and natural disasters. According to the United Nations, in Vietnam, the impacts have already been significant, with a loss of 3.2% of GDP in 2020. Therefore, Vietnam has been making efforts to implement a number of solutions to minimize impacts and adapt to climate change. One of them is fostering an energy transition in which the country is gradually replacing coal with clean energy. This will help Vietnam to get one step closer to the goal of net zero emission by 2050, as Prime Minister Phạm Minh Chính presented at the COP26 in Glasgow last year. And recently, COP26 President Alok Sharma paid a visit to Vietnam to drive the energy transition process through discussion on the Just Energy Transition Partnership. This week, Bizline will learn more about Vietnam's efforts and the benefits of the partnership on delivering on Vietnam's commitments. First of all, let's review the recent visit of the COP26 President in the following clip.
President of the 26th United Nations Climate Change Conference, COP26, Alok Sharma, visited Vietnam to drive progress on a clean energy transition ahead of COP27 from August the 27th to the 30th. During the recent visit, he had meetings with Prime Minister Phạm Minh Chính, National Assembly Chairman Vương Đình Huệ, and the Ministers of Finance and Natural Resources and Environment. In addition, he also met with G7 and development partner donors, as well as businesses and private sector stakeholders, to help drive public and private sector engagement and mobilization of finance. Earlier, the COP26 president visited the Mekong Delta province of Cần Thơ, accompanied by researchers from Cần Thơ University and the Dragon Mekong Research Institute, to see the impact of riverbank erosion and sea level rise on vulnerable areas. He heard first-hand accounts from local communities benefiting from an urban resilience project combating flooding and climate change impact.
COP26 President Alok Sharma said that the proposed Just Energy Transition Partnership provides an excellent opportunity for Vietnam to accelerate its transition away from coal in delivery of its 2050 net zero target, and believed that Vietnam will be a model for the world in terms of energy transition. In order to learn more about Vietnam's energy transition process and the benefits of the Just Energy Transition Partnership for Vietnam, our reporter had an exclusive interview with COP26 President Alok Sharma during his recent visit to Vietnam. Let's take a listen.
So first of all, thank you so much for joining the show. So after the field trip to Cần Thơ City and also the last two trips of yours to Vietnam, in your opinion, how is vital energy transition for the country to respond to climate change and also to improve people's livelihood?
Well, look, it's a pleasure to be on your show, and thank you very much for having me on. As you said, this is my third visit in 18 months to Vietnam, and I hope that demonstrates how important I, indeed the international community, see Vietnam as part of that energy transition that needs to take place across the world. I've had meetings with Prime Minister Chinh, with other ministers as well, and I made very clear to the Prime Minister that we're delighted with the commitments that he made ahead of COP26, particularly committing to net zero emissions by 2050 as part of the economic work that is going on here in Vietnam. And I had, as you know, an opportunity to visit the Mekong Delta, see for myself the impact of a changing climate. In fact, the Prime Minister talked very passionately about why it's so important that we deal with this issue for the people of Vietnam, but also for the people of the world. After COP26, because of the commitments that Vietnam and other countries made, we were able to say with some credibility that we had kept alive the prospect of limiting global warming to below 1.5 degrees. But we're already at 1.1, 1.2 degrees of global warming above pre-industrial levels, and we see the impact of that around us. And the reality is that climate change is a chronic threat that is getting worse. In terms of energy transition in Vietnam, around 65% of emissions in the economy come from the energy sector, and that's why it's so vitally important that this is an area that's addressed. And I know from the discussions that I've been having with the government here that the Prime Minister and others are very committed to tackling this issue. And what we've been working on together with the government is a just energy transition partnership, which means that we would want to have a long-term agreement between Vietnam and G7 countries and other developed nations, where we support Vietnam both with technical support but also in terms of mobilizing financing from the public and private sector, with the aim of ensuring that there is a clean energy transition. There is huge scope here in Vietnam for more solar, more wind power, and it's a real opportunity to grasp that. There is a lot of private sector investment that wants to come into Vietnam, and I hope as a result of the work that we do through the Just Energy Transition Partnership, that will not only lower emissions in the economy, it will also mean more economic growth for Vietnam, and ultimately it will be about protecting lives and livelihoods across the country.
What are the challenges and also opportunities for Vietnam to respond to climate change and also to implement its commitments at COP26?
Well, I think in terms of challenges, obviously one of the key challenges we all face is the changing climate. And what I learned was that in the Mekong Delta, if average global temperatures rise to 2 degrees, we are looking at around 40% of the delta being flooded, affecting 17 million lives and livelihoods. And that's a huge challenge for Vietnam, but indeed we see the same thing across the world as well. The opportunity, of course, is that there is an abundance of sunshine and high winds here in Vietnam, so there's an opportunity to expand that sector. And as I said, there's a lot of demand from the private sector to come in and invest. But what that requires is a review of policies, regulations here in Vietnam, and that's been very much part of our discussion. If we can get to a point where we can get even more of the private sector to come in and invest, I think it will make a huge, huge difference. And the final point I would make here is with regard to energy security. We know that energy security is a key issue across the world, and the response of very many countries is to ensure that in the medium long term they're expanding significantly their renewable energy because that is homegrown. You are not reliant on any imports from outside, and that is something that's very clearly recognized here in the government. So that is the big opportunity here, to make sure that you have not only energy security, but you also ensure that you are cleaning up the environment at the same time.
The potential of renewable energy, including wind and solar power, is considered as one of the keys for energy transition, helping Vietnam achieve its carbon neutrality.
Vietnam for its ambitious commitments at COP26 in Glasgow last year. Energy transition is a key component. As Norway has a lot of experience and capacity and competency in offshore wind, we can transfer this technology also into offshore wind.
I mean, this potential, fully developed, could make Vietnam a global leader in wind and in turn renewable energy. We acknowledge that energy in the current global environment is a difficult and sensitive subject, and in that context, Vietnam's leadership should be commended for staying the course and exploring how to best develop renewable energy.
You can show a new model of development while you're decarbonizing, and a more inclusive way of making sure there's prosperity for more people. So my hope is that Vietnam can show that there's a different way to do development. Now, the global outlook is not good right now, the economic outlook, but I still think that there's ways in which Vietnam can be an attractive place for investment to come in and to show by doing a greener, more inclusive development.
Experts say that the Vietnamese government is seeking to aggressively expand the supply of renewable energy. Meanwhile, the international community and foreign investors are also committed to accompany Vietnam to realize this goal.
The responsibility from the industry to share knowledge, to boost up the local supply chain and to try and get Vietnam ready for the transition. At the same time, we would like Vietnam itself to try and support this, and there is the PDP-8 that's being developed and the survey license process that's going through, but we really need to see that implemented soon. We need to see how the market is going to adapt. So we need to see, Can we get certainty to deliver these projects? Are these projects bankable? Can we sell the energy to Vietnam through EVN?
What we need right now is a clear framework from the government, a clear regulatory framework that will allow us to make these big investments. And I think once that's in place, then we can get a better understanding of the price level. We need a clear framework that will show us how do we secure a contract so that we can secure a return on the investment. And then we need to make sure that the grid is strong enough to absorb the renewable energy where it gets built.
In addition, market insiders believe that there should be more specific guidance on wind power purchase agreements and auctions. Issues on land for onshore wind power projects is also a concern for many investors. Once those issues are resolved, plus the coordination between the government, localities and investors, Vietnam's wind power market is expected to become one of the leading markets in the world and help Vietnam move towards sustainable development.
So how do you assess the country's effort in climate change response and also energy transition in order to achieve its commitments at COP26, including net zero emission?
It's very clear to me that there is a real commitment to deliver on those goals, particularly net zero by 2050, as well as the Prime Minister. I met the Environment Minister, I met the Finance Minister and the Chair of the National Assembly, and they all pointed out that the commitments that were made in Glasgow were thought out, and so there is a real desire across the government to make this work. Of course, since Glasgow, the Prime Minister has set up a committee which he chairs on this issue, and that shows real leadership from the top. And that's what's needed in any government, to push forward an issue, that leadership and that vision from the top of the government, as the Prime Minister is showing. And we've seen the National Climate Strategy come forward as well. What we do need to ensure, though, in Vietnam, as with every other country, is that the commitment to net zero is consistent with the 2030 emission reduction targets, which of course is then consistent within the case of Vietnam with the power development plan that is still being worked on. And one of the things that I would like to see is for Vietnam to come forward with a improved 2030 emission reduction target by the 23rd of September, which is when the United Nations would like to see countries come forward and deliver on their commitment in Glasgow to update their 2030 emission reduction targets.
So what does the Trust Energy Transition Partnership mean for Vietnam, and what support will the country get from this partnership in its energy transition process?
For the Just Energy Transition Partnership, the aim of that is a long-term agreement between Vietnam and the international community, the G7 nations, together with other developed countries as well. And in the case of Vietnam, it is the United Kingdom and the European Union which is helping to coordinate the work of all the G7 nations in this. And the hope is that if we get this political declaration over the line by the time we get to COP27 this November, what it will mean is more technical advice coming forward for Vietnam as part of its clean energy transition, but it will also, very importantly, mean mobilization of public and private finance to ensure that that clean energy transition takes place. As I said, the private sector is extremely keen. So let me give you an example. We have the Danish company Lego, which everyone is familiar with. When I was here on my last visit, they announced that they were going to be investing, as I understand, $1 billion in a new factory here in Vietnam. But what they've been very clear about is that to make that investment, they also need to ensure the factory is powered through green energy. And as I understand, there will be a solar plant built alongside that factory. And I think that is the future, where you see the private sector wanting to come and invest in Vietnam, but that has to also mean delivering clean energy and a clean environment. As I said, there is huge appetite from the private sector, and we need to make sure we unlock that.
Vietnam's renewable energy sector is regarded as one of the most vibrant in Southeast Asia. Recently, a number of leading global renewable energy enterprises have announced their investments in wind power in Vietnam. US-based energy utility AES Corp has announced its plan to develop a major offshore wind farm in Vietnam that could potentially double the country's wind power capacity. The wind farm, estimated to cost $13 billion and with a capacity of 4,000 megawatts, would be built off the central province of Bình Thuận. Earlier, several world's largest energy investors from Norway, Denmark, and the UK also conducted their wind power investment projects in Vietnam.
Vietnam has a huge amount of potential for offshore wind, one of the most exciting markets around the globe. There's a real wealth of resources in terms of wind, a huge amount of wind, and quite a lot of quite shallow waters in Vietnam, which is really suitable for developing offshore wind farm. Vietnam is extremely well placed because you also have a very good supply chain which can transfer across from the offshore oil and gas industry.
The leading Norwegian energy companies, they are here, and they are here for the long term. The leading Norwegian and the largest company in Scandinavia, Equinor, established a country office in Hanoi in May, which means that they are here for the long term, and they are very keen to work together with Vietnamese partners.
In addition to central and southern regions, recently many foreign investors have also shown their interest in the northern region of Vietnam and intend to invest more in onshore wind power rather than only in offshore wind. Notably, Rosatom's wind subsidiary Nova Wind and local developer Anson Energy have signed a cooperation agreement for the construction of a 128-megawatt wind farm in Sơn La Province. Meanwhile, global renewable energy developer, service provider and distributor Baywari also announced the opening of its wind project's representative office in Lạng Sơn Province to develop a 240-megawatt wind project. Preliminary assessment shows that Vietnam's onshore wind power potential is 217 gigawatts, while offshore wind power is 160 gigawatts.
So could you share with us about the results of the partnership negotiations so far?
Well, we've certainly made progress. I've had a team here for a number of days that have been having very detailed discussions with officials in the Vietnam government. We've agreed with the Prime Minister and Minister Ha to continue that dialogue. My team will come forward and do some technical workshops with officials here, and I hope that it may be possible by the time we get to COP27 in November this year to be able to publish a political declaration. In addition to Vietnam, there are a number of other countries that the G7 is working with on delivering just energy transition partnerships. We have Indonesia, India, Senegal, and of course we've been working for over a year on South Africa as well. And I think this is a real opportunity, if we get this right, to ensure that we have a better environment, a cleaner environment for communities across these countries.
At the COP26, France, Germany, the United Kingdom, the United States, and the European Union, together forming the International Partners Group, IPG, announced a new ambitious, long-term Just Energy Transition Partnership, JETP. The first partnership was established with South Africa, also at the COP26. The JETP is a pathfinding initiative and the first of its kind. It is long-term and ambitious in its aspiration to support developing countries toward a low-carbon economy and climate-resilient society, to accelerate just energy transition and decarbonization of the electricity system, and to support the development of new economic opportunities. The JETP opens the way for long-term, ambitious and systemic climate actions to be funded through a range of instruments that support flexible and rapid implementation in ways that build confidence in a just energy transition. Meanwhile, the UK and the European Commission, EC, agreed to sign a proposal by the Vietnamese government to set up a partnership for energy transition between the group of 7 developed economies, G7, and Vietnam.
What more can Vietnam do to, to achieve its commitments at COP26, and which recommendations would you make for the country in this regard?
Well, as I said, there are a range of commitments on methane reduction, on overall emissions reductions that have been made by Vietnam, and I know that work is going on in the government itself to deliver on this. For me, what is key is that we as an international community, as a G7 group of nations, support Vietnam and other developing countries to meet those commitments. And that's what this Just Energy Transition Partnership is all about.
Once again, thank you so much for joining us.
Phạm Minh Chính stressed that Vietnam considers the goal of achieving net zero emissions and switching from fossil fuels to clean and renewable energy as an inevitable development trend of the world and Vietnam in particular. In addition to its own efforts, the country needs financial assistance and technology transfer from development partner donors during negotiations on a just energy transition partnership. Therefore, the Prime Minister assured partners that Vietnam will accelerate the negotiation process to establish a just energy transition partnership, including countries in the Group of Seven. This will not only deliver enhanced climate actions, but it will also help create new jobs, economic growth, clean air, and a resilient, prosperous future. And that brings us to the end of our Bizline program. Feel free to download our app VTV Go from App Store and Google Play, or subscribe to our YouTube channel VTV4 Go for more news and updates. Thank you for tuning in, and until next time.